Welcome to the Shameless Podcast, where I help Christian men kill shame, stand strong, and live on mission. I'm your host, Ken Freire, and I'm bringing you real stories, practical insights, and biblical truths that equip you to break free from your sin, shame, and live a life of purpose. Let's step out of the shadows together and into the light of Christ. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode. And this is going to be a fire episode. It's going to be a sensitive topic, but it's going to be a fantastic episode. Today, I have with me Shawn Bonneteau. He is a Christian coach who helps men overcome sexual addiction and erectile dysfunction, which is going to be the topic of today. It's a sensitive topic because a lot of men don't like talking about it. And Shawn, I'm sure you could attest to that. But before we go deep diving into the conversation, can you tell people something fun about yourself?
Yes, I can. Well, something funny, maybe we'll start with real quick is, so it was for a season, I was known as like the erectile dysfunction guy because no one was really talking about it. And it was a part of my story, started sharing about it and got all these podcast opportunities. So that's maybe a funny thing. But a fun thing is I live in the Czech Republic. I'm Canadian, started in Vancouver, moved to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and then now I live in Czech. And that's a big part of my wife's Czech, but even further felt the calling to do ministry out here on top of what I do with Deep Clean. And the running joke is that we're probably not going to go any further east. It's probably as far as we go unless God has other plans.
Oh, I love it, man. I love it. So you're doing a lot of great work, both overseas and with men. And today, the topic that we're going to talk about is what you said. You used to be the erectile dysfunction guy, right?
Yeah.
Before we go into your story, can you share for those people who might be listening? I don't want to ever assume people know what it is, because some people may actually just be so shameful about it that they don't even know. But what is erectile dysfunction and how does it come out, for most men?
Yeah. It's helpful to differentiate the two types. There's porn-induced erectile dysfunction, also known as PIDE, and then there's the more psychological erectile dysfunction. Sometimes it's called psychological impotence. So the porn-induced side of it is a lot more tied to the chemical imbalances with dopamine and oxytocin, the conditioning of what we do with masturbation. But they do both have kind of the same problem where it boils down to either the inability to get an erection or the inability to stay erect while having intercourse. And then there's also kind of the other areas of delayed ejaculation and premature ejaculation, which are tied to ED as well. But that would be like what ED is and the two types of it. It just boils down to simply put, it's hard to get an erection or it's hard to keep an erection.
Okay. Now, when we talk about this, if you follow anything for men or comedy or crass things, it's always about having a hard on. That's something that we men pride ourselves in. And there's a lot of shame for men having erectile dysfunction. Can you give us a little bit of your backstory of how did this start with you?
Yeah, so much shame. I'll kind of build that up to the kind of the crescendo of how I experience probably more shame than even what most guys experience because of the work that I do. But yeah, like first time I might have experienced ED, late teens, early 20s. I never really knew much about the realm of erection struggles. No one ever talked to me about them. I was watching pornography since I was 10 and masturbating to it. So, with pornography, it's very rare that you would have erection problems because there's always a new video to watch. There's always something more grotesque or risky to see. You can go into different realms that will never cause a problem for the connectors of your penis and your brain. So, until I started to actually explore the physical realm of my sexual addiction, I didn't know any better. So when I started to do that, the first time I ever did actually have sexual intercourse, there was a bit of erectile dysfunction, but I actually had delayed ejaculation where I couldn't ejaculate. And as like a healthy 19-year-old dude, like fitness gurus, athlete, pretty shocking, pretty terrifying. And that was really a wake-up call. I wasn't a Christian at the time. Had an idea that God existed, but I thought he hated me. He was mad at me. He was just kind of this cruel iron fist guy, and it was just a bad dynamic that I had with him because of a lot of pain, trauma, lack of knowledge and understanding. But that first experience of anything around a problem with my penis was what most, at least unchristian men would pride themselves on, is that first time you have sex with somebody. And it was so embarrassing and I was so ashamed. The story goes even deeper into some of the shame with like at a party in my friend's bathroom, just really all these ties of just a lot of shame and embarrassment around my first experience. It became quite traumatic as well, which led to even more struggles with my erections. But it became a problem probably more obvious, not drunk, not at a party, all these other things. When I had a girlfriend at the time, I wouldn't say we were serious in the sense where I wanted to get married, but she was obviously talking about marriage. We were together long enough where that made sense. And there was just challenges with erectile dysfunction along the way. Some of it was because I had watched porn earlier that day or the day before, and naturally I just wasn't ready to have sex or have intercourse, or I just felt so much shame. But other times it was just, I felt so much shame around myself and I felt pressure to perform and just didn't feel confident in the relationship. And you can just see how much of it is tied to different areas of the anxiety we feel, the pressure we feel, the things that we've already done or haven't done, the shame. And that was a lot of my story. And as I unpacked, like, what is ED for me, it really boiled down to the fears I had deep within myself. And then also the shame around, I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I can perform. And there's this cultural norm of like what performance even looks like. And that's where there's so much pressure and so much shame for men, especially Christian or non-Christian. It's a really murky water.
Yeah. Man, Shawn, first of all, thank you for sharing that. And I know you've shared your story quite a bit, but for someone who's listening to that, that might be the first time that they've been like, oh my gosh, there's someone
Yeah.
who gets me, right? Like
Yeah.
that's exactly with what I struggle with. When it first started to happen, what were kind of some of the emotions? And you mentioned the fear and the shame, but like,
Yeah.
I could imagine myself being like, oh crap,
Yeah.
what the heck is
Yeah.
going on? Just kind of walk us through your mindset and what was happening.
Yeah. The deeper reality of it was just this idea that I must be flawed, like something's wrong with me. Whatever I've done with the last 10 years of my life, it's ruined me. I am no good. And it really started to destroy me in the sense of I'm flawed. I'm helpless. I'm hopeless. I have no idea what to do. I don't even know if I'm fixable. And once you fall into those places of defeatism and victim, it's really hard to do anything well. That's when I started like binge eating. I always tell people when I met my wife, I was eating a tub of ice cream almost every night. Like I was just in a bad season in my early 20s, just feeling all the shame from these sexual struggles, very defeated and just riddled with anxiety.
Okay, so there's like emotion after emotion after emotion that just kept piling up.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was the breaking point where you were like, I need to tell someone or I need to go find help?
Mm. Yeah. It started with pornography. That was, I'll say around 22, 21, 22. I had told a couple of mentors in my life, some like trusted friends, but it was more of just opening up that I'm struggling. It wasn't them helping me. It wasn't me really doing much with it, but it was a stepping stone in the right direction. And it was probably about maybe, I don't know, 6 months later or so, I actually gave my life to the Lord and got baptized. And that really opened up more doors to, the Christian world and how they handle addictions and whatnot. And sure, I have some beef against how the church handles addictions, but it was a place where, wow, they're talking about Jesus being the answer, not my harder work. They're talking about getting together and confessing and repenting and supporting one another. So I actually started going to a Monday night support group for addictions. That was a place where I remember the first night going there, I had no intention of telling anybody about my struggle. And I think maybe 3-4 weeks later, I was able to open up and realize it felt so good to be in a room of guys and realize we're all here for each other. And that actually led to me telling my girlfriend at the time, Helena, about the reality of my struggle. When we first met, that didn't come out. It was probably a month and a half or 2 months after we met. And I wish I communicated with her more clearly of the severity of my struggle, but I did tell her that I was struggling. I was going to a support group, and just that alone was a step in the right direction. Obviously, looking back, I wish I would have went a little deeper, but I just didn't know how to. And sometimes we can beat ourselves up so much with, I should have done this and I should have done that. And I could play that game all day long, but I know I did do something and it was a step in the right direction, which slowly I became more vulnerable. I started meeting with a new mentor who understood addictions. And that really was some of the catalyst to where I'm at today.
Man, that's awesome, dude. The mentorship, the community, the vulnerability, all those are huge pieces for everyone
Yeah.
trying to find freedom. But I want to hone in on something you said, and it was the condemnation you felt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it seemed like there was a lot of that prior to getting saved, but even when you got saved, where you're just like, I feel like I should be doing better, or I should be healing faster, or I should confess more. How did you overcome the condemnation?
Yeah. Yeah, we call that shooting all over yourselves in the coaching world. It's no good. It's not a fun thing to do. Man, really, really honestly, that was something that I didn't even really figure out fully until 2 or 3 years ago. Like I was probably 4.5, 5 years free from porn and masturbation, overcome erectile dysfunction. And there were still parts of my spirit that were so burdened by a sense of like, I need to work harder. I need to make more time for the Lord. I need to do this. I should do that. And we can certainly talk more, a bit of a longer answer, and it'll probably tie into more of where we're going. But a lot of that was overcoming the lies, pinpointing the lies, dealing with like soul level stuff with some retreats I went on, starting to look at the mother wound and how I had a lot of fear around safety and the very essence of when you feel unsafe as a human, you're in a constant dysregulated state. I had never really thought of it that way. I always thought my main problem was with my dad. Sure, he contributed to my struggles, but I would probably actually say it was more 80% mom, 20% dad. And when I realized that 4 or 5 years into being free from porn, I was like, what did I miss? Like, am I just dumb? Like, actually, a lot of those, am I just flawed mindset came back. And I had to really learn about God's timing and God's grace, and that it doesn't matter if I miss something. God's going to do something now. And I really had to start learning how to retrain the way I see mistakes I might have made. Because growing up, when I made a mistake, my mom made sure I knew about it. God's so different in that way. And that's actually what helped me overcome things like erectile dysfunction and addiction in of itself.
Okay, so you talked about your mother wound and how that has been a major contributor to it was a coping mechanism. So pornography, all these
Yeah.
things were a coping mechanism for a mother wound that you had, and how she treated you, how you didn't feel unsafe, and then it built this cycle of sooner or later erectile dysfunction, right?
Yep. Yeah, naturally it was that idea of like, I am not safe to fail, not safe to tell people that I'm not okay. This mantra a lot of young people come up with. If it's going to be, it's up to me. And I really built that belief system as a child that I can't rely on mom. I don't know if she's going to be nice mom today or crazy mom today. You know, I saw my dad watching porn. After about when I was 10 years old, he became quite distant from me emotionally. And I just didn't know who I could go to when I had failures and struggles. So I learned to go to porn. I learned to masturbate. I learned to play drums and smash cymbals because I was so angry. You know, all these ways of coping that, sure, like they worked in the moment, but I wasn't learning how to actually be a healthier person.
Yeah. And that healthier person started to produce the erectile dysfunction. Ultimately, that was kind
Mm,
of the thing. And as you think about your life when you started to get freedom, right? You started to get freedom from pornography, from masturbation. How did you start healing from erectile dysfunction? Because, a lot of people would say, well, just go get some pills, go take care
yeah.
of yourself that way, and you'll be fine. But you actually didn't do any pills.
Yeah.
A lot of it was spiritual healing and psychological healing that you went through.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It was when I started to realize that my wife is a very safe person, but there's a part of me that doesn't believe she's a safe person. And I started to see this polarizing opposites of part of me knows that I can tell her anything, that she's there for me when I fail. But there was a sliver inside of me that believed that she was going to treat me like my mom. And we started to have, I'd say once a week, I was having issues with erectile dysfunction where we would start having sex and I wasn't able to continue. And I didn't know how to talk to my wife about it. I didn't know what to do about it. No one was talking about it, hence being the ED guy. And I just felt so stupid. Like, here I am, like, called to coach guys with sexual struggles. I've quit pornography and masturbation. I've been told that once you do that, all this other stuff is taken care of. again, like, what is wrong with me? How do I not know any better? And it was a place of a lot of shame. I questioned my calling often. I felt like, yeah, like, Helena, we could try having sex. I don't really know like how it's going to go. I just didn't have language for where to go with that because I didn't want to tell her the deeper internal turmoil I was having. It could have been about work. It could have been about a friendship. It could have been something that's coming up about my mom. And I just didn't feel like I could tell her that because there was that sliver inside of me that believed if I tell her what I'm thinking about, she's going to say that, like, oh, you don't think I'm attractive enough, or I can't believe, like, you do this stuff for your job. I can't believe you would do that. And that was like so wild to think that that part of me was so powerful. The defining factor for me was actually I found two people to talk to specifically about ED. One of them was from Family Life Canada. My wife and I had a monthly marriage mentor, and the couple that ran that organization, I think they just actually gave up the full leadership. They retired, but it was a guy named Neil Josephson. Him and his wife just spoke such life into our marriage in ways that you just like, that's just treasure. Like, they were just phenomenal people. And then from there, I ended up working with a guy named Greg Oliver, who's been on the Deep Clean podcast, my podcast. He's a fantastic guy. He runs Awaken Ministries out of Alabama, Birmingham. And I think him and I only had 2 or 3 sessions, but he just spoke to the exact area that I was missing because he also does the same work that I do. And I needed somebody who got me. And God just brought him into my life at the perfect time. And he hit on a couple things that no one had ever hit on before. And no joke, like a month later, I was free, completely free. I think I maybe had like 1 or 2 issues in the next year or so. And I've had maybe I've had 1 ED situation, which I wouldn't even call it an ED situation because I was able to talk about it. It was just, the reality was, it was just a very stressful situation that naturally would cause anybody turmoil. But it's been like 4 years. Like, it's incredible.
Dude, that's awesome, man. What were the things that he said to you that really changed and made it so pivotal that like it?
Yeah, it was almost like God had Neil and Greg on the same brainwave. Like, Neil was talking about this concept of getting on the same page sexually in communicating. Obviously, that's a common thing people would say to somebody, but he said it in a way that stuck differently. Kind of like this concept of like a sexual template, which is what I teach now. But he really promoted this idea, as well as Greg. They both came together separately, and we're just talking about these stages of how to overcome really what is at the heart of ED. In my scenario was fears, lies, and unhealthy expectations. So one of the main steps that Helen and I did, we did them separately and they came together. And this is part of my teaching now, is it's called What's in the Way. And both parties will go on their own for whatever, half hour or a couple of days, and just write out all the fears about their sex life, all the lies about their sex life, all the expectations about their sex life. And they'll bring it together in a safe place where they've already prepared this place where this is a safe place where we're not going to defend anything. We're not going to justify. We're just going to share the reality of what's going on inside. When I start thinking about having sex, when I start thinking about you, and I want, like, this is not about you. That's what's so crazy about this problem. This isn't about you. This is actually just about something inside of me. So Han and I both did that. And there's obviously the famous quote, you want to hear it from the horse's mouth. There was something so special about telling Helena, I don't think that you like me when I can't get an erection, or when you don't orgasm, I believe you think less of me as a man. And for her to tell me word for word, not just like, oh, I don't think that, Shawn, but Shawn, I love you. I love intimacy with you. I love sex with you regardless of what happens. I love you. And to have that come in and completely dilute and destroy the lie or the fear, it was so life-changing because I just never had that in my life with women, like my mom, my sisters, women growing up. I was always like betrayed, and there was always unsafety around me. I was always lied to, and that was that sliver inside of me. And Helena just came and just destroyed whatever that sliver was with love.
Man, it sounds like, one, your wife is amazing.
Yes, praise God, man.
Praise God. But it's beautiful how wives do that, right? I had another guest that we had a similar conversation about how wives they know how to say certain things. They could either speak life or death. But when they speak life, it's like we step up to another level of our transformation. And I love how you said this, because the way I think about it, right, is that one, you had a safe space to communicate your fears, your lies, and just any expectations that you had. And then not only that, she didn't judge you for those. She didn't be like, oh yeah, actually that, let's add more to it.
Yeah.
There was no judgment. But then the key or the linchpin was that she spoke truth into those
Yes.
lies and those
Exactly.
fears. Um, did you find that you guys had to do this process several times? Like for some people who might be struggling, is this like a continual thing? Is this a one-time thing? How does that typically work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's going to be probably more situational. Like, I was 3 years sober and free from porn. So, like, Helen and I had some really deep conversations. Like, we trusted each other. We had a good thing going, right? A lot of times when I'm working with people and doing this sexual template, it's usually like they're just quitting porn. There's not much trust. There's not much safety. So, yes, I would say that these things are being reviewed often, maybe monthly. You have a date night over wine and you rekindle that fire of that sexual template. But yeah, Helen and I would definitely go back to it and tweak it maybe once a year or something, or when it just seemed like something was off. But we ended up taking that model and putting it into different areas of our life as well. It's like, what are the lies and the fears in the way of us enjoying adventure together or whatever else? And it's just really cool that that same concept applies in all facets. But sex is the one area, obviously, I just struggled so much to talk about. So yeah, it could be a monthly conversation, not so much so that it feels like it has to happen. I think it just needs to feel natural. And that's why I'm a big fan of sexual template being it's between you and your wife and the Lord. And that's really like where we make the marriage bed healthy, is when it's that three, almost that triune element where it's husband, wife, and the Lord. And as long as all three are honored and glorified and respected, man, it's so beautiful.
I love it, man. And I want to do a little deep dive on the sexual template here in a second. But there's something that you said that sparked my mind is like, why do you feel like for men, it's so hard to talk about sex and sexual intimacy, right? It seems like we can talk about a lot of other things, but when it comes to
Yeah.
sexual intimacy, there seems to be barriers
Yeah.
there. Can you
Absolutely.
speak into that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the main two would be the fear of rejection and the fear of failure. It just plagues all men, where there's just such like we've all had fears, or so we've all had failures and rejection in our childhood. And the reality is a lot of the things that we think we failed in and were rejected by weren't actually rejection or fear. We just didn't, or failure. We just didn't have anybody process those things with us. I was just talking to a client earlier today where he said he got rejected by asking a girl out the other day, and I had to ask him, like, did you get rejected or did you feel rejected? It's very different, right? If somebody tells us no, it's not a rejection, but we might feel rejected. And I think a lot of men have been, buying into this concept in the world today, where you have depression, you have, an anxiety disorder, you have all these problems, when ultimately our feelings have began to control what's true, and we've separated what we feel is true from what is true, and we have to reclaim how to live in what is true. And the only way to do that is to actually like reparent those child parts of us. So fear of failure, fear of rejection, by far are the reasons why talking about anything intimate is so scary.
That's such a great insight, and I was thinking about what you just said, the perception versus the reality,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
how much perception had hindered me a lot for years
Yeah.
in actually walking through fear of rejection and fear of failure.
Mm.
And if I'm honest, even today, right? Whenever it comes to work or anything, I have another podcast that I do with my work, and we
Yeah.
talk a lot about goal achievement and all this fun stuff. But one of the things that I talk about is just fear of failure is my
Yeah.
number one thing that I hate. I'm
Yep.
always striving because I call myself a recovering perfectionist. I'm
Yep. Yep.
always striving to try to be the best
Mm.
at everything that I do. And if I
Yeah.
can't, there's all these little lies that come in. Like, you'll never be good enough. You'll never get to
Yeah.
the top. You'll never do this, X, Y, Z. And
Exactly.
I can see how that permeates intimacy as well.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And it builds up all that pressure. And then you have this expectation that no one can hit, but you think you have to hit it.
Yeah.
And then there's just no way you're going to be able to get aroused.
Yeah. And that's where you came in with the sexual template, right? So walk
Yes.
everybody through what is the sexual template and how to use it.
Yeah, definitely. So I have a mini course that I created many years ago. It's very outdated in video quality, but the content is still good, which is awesome. But yeah, again, it was a mix of what Neil taught me, what Greg taught me. I kind of just put it into a structure. Step one is like, what is our purpose in our sex life as a couple? A lot of couples don't even really know what's their purpose together. Ultimately, we want to look biblically, but we also want to look at each other's own desires, each other's passions and desires to say, it's to serve one another. What does that mean to us? We work with guys, they create a mission statement. A lot of times you hear the cliche mission statement, I want to be a man of God and a man of integrity. It's like, that's cool, but what do those words even mean to you? Like, so it's like, I want to serve my wife. I want to be a leader of the house. That's cool, but like, anyone can say that. Like, what does that really mean? So step one is define, like, what's our purpose as a couple in our sex life with intimacy? Why do we care about it? Why does it matter to us? Why are we going to make time for it? Why are we going to push through discomfort to make it a priority? So that's step one. And then step two is the what's in the way. Definitely my favorite step, which is the uncomfortable step. But what's in the way? All the lies, all the fears, all the expectations, and the more the merrier. Get them all out. Like, we want to expose that stuff. Satan loves to prey on these ideas, these thoughts, these fears that stay within us. So we need to get them out, even if they don't get dealt with right away. Get them out. Get them somewhere. Such a beauty in that. Then the third step is what is true, what is factual, and that's where the wife would speak to the husband would speak to the wife, of combating those lies with what is true. Not just like if my wife comes to me, I'm such a bad mom. It's like telling her that she's not a bad mom. Sure, like that's okay to then lead into what she actually is. But a lot of times we actually don't know how to affirm people. We often say like, you're not that. And it's like, that's not an affirmation. You're not actually telling them what they are. So we need to learn how to do that in a really beautiful way. And I think that's one of the easiest concepts for married guys. My wife would come to me and say, oh, I just feel like a terrible mom today. I'm like, you're not a terrible mom, Helena. You are a beautiful mom that I've seen do some incredible things, but you're also a flawed person. So like, tell me about some of the struggles today.
Yeah.
And it's just these opportunities to have those conversations.
It's funny because I'm great at a lot of things. And, if I get in front of you in these conversations, I can be so encouraging, so exhorting, and people are like, wow, Ken, you're amazing. But my wife, she one of her love languages is words of affirmation.
Yeah.
And I feel like throughout the day, I have nothing. And I would say I fall into that trap. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
you're not a bad mom. Or if I'm in a bad mood, sometimes I'll be like, you could have done better today.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that's shame on me. That's actually appropriate shame where I need to affirm her better. I need to
Yeah.
actually be like, no. I love how you said it. It's not just a negative. You have to talk about the positive,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely, man.
And
Absolutely.
speaking truth. So for you, Shawn, as you think about this sexual template, how do you help men
Yeah.
who are like just stuck, right? Those guys who are like, I'm listening to this and they're like, I need your help. I need what you
Yeah.
have, but I'm just afraid to actually share my struggles,
Yeah.
right? Because I don't have a Helena, right?
Yeah.
I don't have Bethany, which is my wife. I
Yeah.
don't have those people who I could share this stuff with. I don't have individuals that I feel comfortable with. And I've never felt what you have felt before. Where do I start?
Yeah, 100%. Just real quick, Ken, those are the three main steps. The other three steps
Oh
of
yeah, go
the
for it.
sexual template, totally fine. It's defining what are your expectations for sex, like what you feel is healthy and what you feel is unhealthy, and then talking about those together to find out like what meets that like ideal requirement of honoring the marriage bed with the Lord. And then the next step is defining what you like, what you want, and what you need, realizing that those are all different things. What you need might be intimacy. What you want might be this type of sexual encounter, but that might not be what your wife wants. And what she needs is also intimacy. So how do you get that need met through the correct wants? It's a beautiful conversation. And then ultimately, the last step is just putting it all together and creating this sexual template to say, this is what sex looks like between Shawn and Helena, and whatever anyone else is telling us they like to do, it doesn't really matter because we've done this with the Lord and we can just rest in that.
Yeah. Okay. So before we talk about the steps of
Yeah.
helping
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
I like those last three steps. This might sound like a silly question, but I'm just thinking as a guy, if I struggled with erectile dysfunction, would someone, and has any of your clients ever come to you and been like, you know what? My mission statement is that I want to be able to ejaculate with my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And like, this is what I want. And this is a need. Or like, do they ever have like duration of time where they're like, you know what, I wish I could last at least 20 minutes if they struggle with premature ejaculation or whatever those things?
Yeah.
Is that kind of the stuff that you're like saying, hey, just get all that stuff out in the open? Do you have clients who come to you and tell you that stuff? I'm just curious how that plays out.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a big fan of just getting everything out in the open, and that creates the conversation of what feels helpful, what feels exciting, what meets the desires of both parties. So I'm always a big fan of more the better. Like I remember being at a retreat for a week once. It was called Restoring the Foundations, and it was all about like the deep areas of the soul. And one of the days was on soul ties, and I had to fill out this worksheet for breaking soul ties. And I think I had almost 60 different things that I felt like my soul must be tied to because I, had romantic relationships or these porn websites, or I can't seem to say no to these things as often as I'd like to. And the guy running the retreat was like, man, I think this is the most we've ever had someone write down. I was like, everybody must be lying. Like, like I was 4 years sober and free from porn. Like if I'm writing 60 things down, like I'm imagining most guys have a lot more than that.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. So, as you think about that, part of you was like, it sounds like you're more of a vulnerable individual. You're in tune with your emotions as well, a little bit more.
Yeah.
You recognize that you need that healing,
Yeah.
right? So going back to that other question, how do
Yeah.
you get other guys to get to that place where they're like,
Yeah.
I need to take steps
Yeah.
to heal?
Yeah. First step for me is making sure that if they're uncomfortable, we can do some of those steps just between him and I, where he'll write down what's in the way. We'll talk through it. We'll kind of just lay some of that out and get him used to that language. There's two other modalities that are really beautiful. My favorite one is inner child healing, where we'll go back to not just memories, but like the boy himself that felt fear, that felt unsafe, that felt rejected in the face of potentially being with other women. And we'll reparent that boy, separating what feels true from what is true, so that when he's speaking with his wife, he can show up as an adult rather than a little boy. And then there's another modality called empty chair therapy, which is just this great concept where you kind of close your eyes, imagine like two chairs across from each other, and you can kind of practice having these sorts of conversations with that person you hope to talk to, where empty chair therapy is amazing for forgiving people, like practicing forgiveness or doing these sorts of conversations where you're imagining telling your wife that you're afraid to start having sex because you might not get an erection. Like it's so amazing just to have that safe space in your mind. And, the imaginative part of the brain is where trauma is stored. So the more we can tap into that, I've just seen the Lord heal guys in ways that talk therapy just doesn't heal.
Yeah. And one of the things about that particular scenario that you just talked about that I've done with people is, hey, imagine you're talking to the individual. Tell
Yes.
me what you think they're actually going to say to you.
Yes.
And it
Exactly.
uncovers these lies, right? And sometimes they're true. Sometimes,
Yeah.
people are not perfect. They're not going to say, but at least now we are able to,
Yep.
preemptively prepare them if those things
100%.
are true. But then when the lies come, kind of like what Helena did with you, right?
Yes.
She's like, no, 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 that right there is not true. Let me speak truth into it. And that's where I've seen a lot of the transformation happen.
Yeah, yeah, so cool, Ken. That's awesome, man. I'm a huge fan of preparing guys when they're about to talk to somebody about forgiveness or these sorts of conversations. I also prepare them for the worst because that's usually where guys go and relapse, right? They expect the best and the worst happens and they didn't prepare for it.
Yeah. And so as you help them prepare for it, what are some steps that you help them with in that preparation phase?
Yeah, so that would be like the hardest conversation for guys to have, is that what's in the way conversation, just naturally because it's so vulnerable and it's a very easy place to get defensive. So it's usually, a week or two in advance going to their wife and saying, hey, hon, I really want to have this conversation. And this might be where it's just the guy who's going to do it for the first point and present it and show his wife that he's working and healing and wanting to reconcile. So it might be, hey, hon, I really want to have this special conversation. I've spent some time dealing with the things that go on in my head when we are intimate, when we're having sex, that really caused me to struggle with erectile dysfunction. And I want to create a safe space where we can talk about those things, where I can present them to you, not as I want to tell you where you're doing anything wrong, because this isn't actually about you. It's really about my internal challenges that I'm noticing tie back to my mother and women that I was cheated on or betrayed by. I just want to create a safe space where you can hear that. And I'd love to just grab a bottle of wine, light some candles. I just want you to feel really safe. Like, how do you feel about that? Can we talk about that? And just creating this conversation around what does that look like? How can it just be incredibly safe? Because that's going to be the name of the game. Even if you
Yeah.
fumble, you don't get through it all. It's like, if it feels safe and it's a place where there's no defensiveness or justification, it's going to open up more of those conversations.
Yeah. What happens if like the wife is like, let's not talk about it next week. Let's talk about it right now. We're like, I'm
Yeah.
free right now.
Yeah.
Like, let's do it right now. What happens then?
That happens. That's where like we want to have like the guy prepared. Like he's not gonna go and present the idea to his wife if it's
Yeah.
not ready. So I would always want somebody to say something along the lines of, I have it prepared, but it's quite an emotional conversation for me. Like we could certainly have it right now. I want to honor what would make you feel safe as well. But I also have like the best interest in mind for our relationship. And I really would love to do it over a glass of wine in a place where we've prepared ourselves emotionally, spiritually, we've prayed over it. That would be my hope. And that's actually what I've been counseled by Shawn to do. But I want to make sure you feel safe with that as well.
Yeah. I love that. I love that tip of there's a couple of things there. Number one, you kind of put your counselor or coach right there, like, hey, this is the advice he
That's
gave
right.
me.
That's
He's
right.
the expert. So let's follow his advice. But two, like you're also trying to take the leadership mantle a little bit. We're just
Yes.
like, hey,
Yes.
how do we guide you well?
Yeah.
And the preparation, right? No, like I think one of the things I think about is no one likes to have a deep, intense conversation with both parties not prepared. Here, at least you're
Oh
saying,
man.
let's both get
Absolutely.
in it, prayer. You're mentally ready for a hard conversation. And really, I find for the spouse, when they're coming in trying to, when the husband's trying to find healing, the spouse now is mentally more prepared to be able to give
Yeah.
good feedback or good advice and truth versus kind of being caught off guard.
It's so true. And women, at least from what I've seen, right, they want to like, yeah, like that's amazing. You're making progress. Like, tell me about it. And guys, yeah, we're just not as in tune with our emotions that way. Like, often see guys where when they try and have those conversations off the hip, it just feels like they go in rabbit trails and they go off topic. They say things that we didn't plan for them to say. And it actually a lot of times makes things worse. Not because of what they say necessarily, but because it feels so scattered. And women are looking for structure in that sense of their recovery. They're looking for something they can grab onto and trust. And sometimes when they see their husband scattered all over the place, kind of like a bit behind his breath, it doesn't build the most confidence.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that I had a friend of mine who told me, and this wasn't related to ED or pornography, but he just had a conflict with someone. And he's like, I just decided to write it down. He's a great writer. He's a
Yeah,
great communicator with words. He's like, I wrote it down. And literally when we met, I just read it. And he's like, it
perfect.
was one of the most beneficial things I could have
Yeah,
done
yeah,
to get progress in this conversation. And things went a whole lot better.
yeah.
So,
So good.
guys listening, I think that if you feel like you stumble with your words, try writing it
Hmm.
down.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't come off disingenuine. And that's probably the lie, is that if I script it, it'll sound robotic. It's like, no, it's you reading what you wrote. Like, that's actually really beautiful. And then maybe the other thing I would say is that there's this concept where guys feel like if they don't just do what their wife's asking, or if they're in the middle of a conflict, they don't just like stay at it and fix it right in that moment. They're almost doing a disservice. But I think the best thing we could ever do is keep the best interest of the relationship in mind. So if you're in a conflict, it's a beautiful gift to tell your wife, hey, I'm in fight mode right now. And this isn't going in the direction that I want it to. I really want to reconcile with you, but I can't right now. I need 10 minutes to decompress and come back to this. A lot of guys feel like that's just going to make their wife angry. It's like, you are doing the right thing. If she is angry about that, it's probably because you've never shown her that you can be trusted. But why don't you show her that now?
Yeah. And all of this, going back to erectile dysfunction, is the building blocks that you're helping people
Yeah.
because you're setting up proper boundaries, you're setting up proper safety so that you can have these conversations and the anxiety, the fear starts to go away and you can have
Yeah.
proper expectations in the future.
Exactly.
Shawn, as we wrap up here, what's one, final takeaway that you could just give men who, if they are struggling with this, they can truly find freedom?
Hmm. Yeah, I like to give this visual. I don't know if this is going to be recorded or not, but I always love to give this visual of there is the guy I'm working with, and then there's a problem. And most of the guys that I work with, they think that they are the problem. They have this like connection point, but I love to show them visually it's separated. Sure, like there's a sin problem, but ultimately it's like, even if you think you're flawed and you are flawed, yeah, we are all flawed, but God has come in and redeemed you. There is a problem, and then there's you. We don't have to say you are the problem. When we can separate those two things, it helps us talk about the problem with vulnerability. It helps us look at what the problem is with the lies and the fears and the expectations. And it just lays a beautiful groundwork for reclaiming what really intimacy is being fully known.
I love that. You're like helping disassociate the emotional entanglements by saying,
Yeah.
hey, this is a problem. This is you.
Yeah.
And men love solving problems. So then they kind of go and be like, oh, yeah, that's the problem. All right, let's look at it objectively. I love that, man. Shawn, as we wrap up here, man, if people are listening to this, are like, I love what Shawn is talking about. I need what he's got. What's the best way to reach out to you or just even get advice?
Yeah, absolutely. Secrethabit.ca is my website that I've had for a long time. I work with Deep Clean now, but we kept that website as a place of free resources. So on there, you'll see my blog. You can get my 90-day withdrawal guide. You can book a call with our team to learn how to work with me. You can look at some of the mini courses I've created. So there's a lot of awesome resources there on top of our podcast. So secrethabit.ca would definitely be the place to go. And that's where you're going to be able to get everything. In terms of like wanting to contact me, I can give you my email, Ken, Shawn.Bonneteau@sophiasam.com. So, not the easiest one for everyone to know how to spell, but if somebody wanted to reach out and maybe get a little bit of direction of where to go next, it could certainly help them with that as well.
Yeah. I'll put it in the show notes so people have it.
Yeah.
They'll be like, it's kind of like my last name. Everybody's like, how do you spell that? I'm like,
Yes.
I try to make it simple. Just Ken. Here we go. Awesome. Well,
Yes.
Shawn, thank you so much for all this. And thank you for helping men. Because one of the things I always like to share is that I believe men are the bedrock of society. When you have thriving men, you have thriving wives, you have thriving kids, you have a thriving society. Like all that starts with if men are whole and healed. And I love that you're just helping in a place where there can be so much shame and so much secrecy. You're like, no, let's get this out in the open and let's start to see what happens. And my favorite part is you're trying to do it without drugs, right? Because there's a
Yes.
psychological and spiritual
Yeah.
component to it. And if you could heal that way, praise God, right? Then you don't need the extra
Absolutely.
drugs. You don't need the side effects. You've
Yeah.
actually taken care of yourself, man. And I love that about what you're doing. And I'm praying that the Lord just keeps blessing your ministry and all the stuff you're doing in the Czech Republic and just with men. So thank you so much for everything you've done.
Yeah, receive that, Ken. It's a blessing to hear that. And I'm always humbled being able to see God use my story. And my mantra for many years was, let my failures be your success. So that's a mantra that I love to live by.
I love it. I love it. Well, with that being said, we're going to wrap up our time here for you men. Kind of what he was just saying, right? Like let his failures, let my failures be your success. And the thing that I want you to always keep thinking about as we wrap up this episode is men, continue to kill shame, stand strong, and be on mission. Hope you guys have a great day and God bless. Thanks for joining us today. If you found this episode helpful, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. Remember, killing shame isn't just about breaking free from the past. It's about walking boldly into the future God has for you.